Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us again. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce our second keynote speaker for today, Dr. Eliana Stavrou. Dr. Eliana is an assistant professor and the course leader of the MSc Cybersecurity at the University of Central Lancashire in Cyprus. She's also a member of the expert advisory panel at the Global Cybersecurity Capacity Center of Oxford University in the UK, and a member of the Doctoral School of the European Security and Defense College. She has worked in the area of cybersecurity for over 15 years, and the last few years, her research focuses on cyber resilience, cyber situational awareness, threat profiling, and cybersecurity capabilities development. So, Dr. Eliana, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Hannah, for the introduction. Give me a second to share my screen, and then I will start the presentation. So let me welcome everyone at this presentation. As Hannah mentioned, I'm Eliana Stavrou. I'm an assistant professor in cybersecurity at the University of Central Lancashire in Cyprus, leading the MSc Cybersecurity course. Give me a second to arrange here my screen. Okay. First, I would like to thank Cyril for inviting me to deliver one of the keynote talks. I have to say that I'm really excited to be here and talk about this topic. So today I will talk about the need to rewire cybersecurity education and training so we can improve cyber resilience across organizations by promoting a cyber situational awareness culture. So I will start with a brief introduction into the problem and then move on to discuss how the coronavirus has transformed the cyber threat landscape, affected pretty much everyone, business, individuals, even the cybersecurity profession. And then I will focus the discussion in the different means we use in terms of awareness and training, and on the limiting factors why these means are not so effective. And finally, I will talk about the need to rewire cybersecurity education and training so we can reinforce cyber resilience and the curricula we need to develop so we can improve this aspect. And my discussion will go across two directions. One, to expand the cyber teams, and the other one is to develop a sustainable cyber situational awareness culture. So I will start by saying that the cybersecurity community has been long discussing about the cyber pandemic that will disrupt the business, critical services on a global scale and have a devastating impact to society. And unfortunately, this is what we have been experiencing with the coronavirus pandemic. And we have seen the last year how it has created a new reality, changed how people work, do business, and interact together. And unfortunately, this new reality extended the corporate environment to cover the employees' home environments, and inevitably has shifted the attack surface and gave more opportunities to attackers to exploit people across society. And throughout this time, we have seen that no industry is unaffected. We have seen how ransomware affects pretty much all industries, and that society as a whole is still unprepared to defend against emerging cyber attacks. Even though the different efforts we are placing in terms of awareness and training. So the big question here is how can we minimize the impact from emerging disruptive cyber attacks? And one approach to take is to improve the cyber resilience competencies of people so they can be better prepared, respond and effectively recover from cyber attacks. And to do so, we need to consider how we need to rewire cybersecurity education and training, so we can establish a cyber situational awareness culture that will assist us in building the cyber resilience we need in organizations. Now, if we look into the cyber threat landscape that has been transformed through the coronavirus, we should acknowledge that the attackers have shifted their attention to the human element and focused on phishing attacks so they can initiate the exploitation of vulnerabilities. We have seen a spike of scams. We're talking about more than 400% increase in scams since last year. We have Google reporting, blocking tens of millions of malware and phishing emails daily. And unfortunately, all these should be enough to provide evidence that people are still vulnerable. We've seen through different studies a great percentage of people still falling for phishing scams, which indicates that what we have been doing, unfortunately, is not enough. And we need to take a step back and reconsider our efforts so we can create more effective awareness and training curricula and relevant activities. Now, in terms of building a cyber resilient workforce, we first need to take a look at the cybersecurity profession and the crisis that has been created due to the pandemic. We have seen how the responsibilities of cyber experts have been expanded due to the situation, and this is something that needs to be taken into consideration. Now, there is a very interesting study conducted by the Enterprise Strategy Group and the Information System Security Association, where they focused on the experience of cybersecurity professionals during this period. And they are surveyed into some alarming results that I would like to highlight because it's important to have them in mind when we're trying to build new awareness and training activities. And I'm pretty sure that probably you will relate to some, or if not all, of the results I'm going to discuss. As I said, these are some of the results. So I just extracted some interesting observations. One of the questions they posed was, what are the most stressful aspects of your job as a cybersecurity professional? And we see that at the top of the list is to keep up with the security needs of new IT initiatives and the overwhelming workload that has been increased during this period, given that we have new needs in terms of working modes and the new blending mode, having people working at home, having people working at the company's establishment, and so on. And then they ask people of the factors they consider the biggest contributors to the security events that the organization experienced in the past 2 years. And you see at the top of the list that they have listed the lack of adequate training of non-technical employees and the poor security hygiene that is relevant with the IT assets that people were actually dealing with. Which give us an indication of how effective our efforts have been so far or not. And as you see here, I've listed that 57% reported that they cannot keep up with the cybersecurity skills due to the demand of their job. And this observation, it was across the entire survey where we have been observing that people were listing the workload across all the aspects that the survey was actually investigating. Also, having in mind that in many occasions, cybersecurity professionals work either on an individual base, if we are considering small companies, or in small teams, The survey was investigating this aspect, and they asked people of what type of impact they consider that the skills shortage had on their organization. So beyond the increased workload, they also mentioned the inability to fully learn the technologies that they're actually using, which it's something important to consider, because obvious it can create many vulnerabilities if people cannot deal correctly with the security technologies they are using. Also, the high burnout and the increase in human error that is relevant to cybersecurity tasks have been among the results that have been listed. And this is not surprising if we consider the increased workload of people. And of course, it's not surprising to see that 65% of the participants said that their organization should provide more training to the cybersecurity teams so they can keep up with the business and IT risks. Also, another interesting observation is that they reported that cybersecurity professionals need 3 to 5 years to become proficient. And this is a long time given the dynamics of the cyber threat landscape. Also, they said that the organizations hire junior employees rather than experienced candidates, and they train them. And having in mind the results from the survey, we can say that it should be a priority to accelerate the skills development, because we need to have junior employees catch up very quickly with the necessary business and IT risks, and be able to protect the company accordingly. That's why we need to keep focusing on this area. And some other interesting observation is that participants mentioned that different organizations should be doing more to address cybersecurity challenges. And as you can see, nobody is excluded from public schools and institutions, government agencies, cybersecurity community at large, and also their organization. So this is something that needs to be taken into consideration, and we need to keep trying to make people aware and educate them accordingly. Now, the other aspect that I would like to mention, we can consider in terms of building a cyber resilient workforce, concerns the actual awareness and training efforts we implement, especially focusing on the non-technical workforce. And we need to take into consideration what are the limiting factors that these efforts that have not yielded the relevant cyber resilient level that is required in organizations so they can defend from cyber attacks. Now, when we are talking about cybersecurity awareness and trainings, we are referring to how much our end users can be educated so they can understand their environment, the potential cyber threats, and the relevant risks that the assets in their environment are relevant to this, and then apply appropriate cyber hygiene practices. Now, we have different means that we implement across an organization. The typical means involve infographics, posters, guides, tips. This can be considered the passive means of awareness and sort of training. And then we implement more active means like phishing simulations, games, and of course, seminars, where we have the opportunity to actually engage people and try to make them understand and realize what the problem is and how they can actually implement various practices. Now, let's examine some of the main reasons why our efforts are not so effective. Here, I would like to say that we have to consider two groups of people. One concerns the end users, and the other one concerns the experts that are actually developing the awareness and training efforts. On one hand, we have the users that are often prefer convenience over security. Some employees might be ignorant, they're not aware of cybersecurity fundamentals, or they don't understand them. So they are not motivated enough to change their behavior. And a big challenge to all this is that often people have a false sense of security. And we tend to have the mentality that it's not going to happen to us. Why? So why lose our convenience over security? All these aspects need to be taken into consideration when we are building awareness and training activities. Now, on the other hand, we have our experts that they have to promote different activities. The problem here is that often we don't consider the digital literacy of our audience. So we are creating flat activities across the workforce. And unfortunately, we end up not delivering the correct message to the target audience. And this is something that we need to consider in order to improve what we have been doing so far. So to address all these issues, we need to take a step back and rewire our efforts so we can improve cyber resilience in the workforce and be able to defend against an emerging cyber threat landscape. Now, I have been talking about cyber resilience, and I want to formally state it so we can see what it actually entails. And also this definition has, let's say, strong links with the concept and the philosophy of the cyber situational awareness. That we should inform our activities in terms of education and training. So according to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, cyber resilience is the ability to anticipate, withstand, recover, and adapt from attacks that compromise our information systems. So this is something that we need to have as a direction when we are implementing our activities, because we want people to have the appropriate skills and knowledge, not only to defend and protect the systems, but also to anticipate, being able to recover, and also to adapt. This is very important if we want to keep up with the dynamics in cyberspace. So to achieve cyber resilience, we should take two directions. One is to expand the cyber teams so we can create more effective activities, and also we can balance the amount of responsibility that people have versus the different roles they are undertaking, because many times people have more than one roles in cyber security. And on the other hand, we need to promote a sustainable cyber hygiene behavior through a cyber situational awareness culture. This culture should inform the mentoring programs we should establish in an organization, and also should inform custom cyber curriculums that we need to develop so we can educate different groups of people in an organization. Now, we've covered cyber resilience. Let me talk a bit about the concept of cyber situational awareness culture and what do we mean by that. First, I will consider what situational awareness is, and then let's put it in a cyber context. Now, according to Dr. Esli, situational awareness is the perception of the elements in the environment within a volume of time and space, the comprehension of their meaning, and the projection of their status in the near future. Now, this is very relevant to what we are experiencing in cyberspace and what we need to achieve in our awareness and trainings. So in cyberspace, we want everybody to be aware of a cyber situation. And by that, we meaning to be able to identify the assets that are relevant in their environment, understand their value, what are the relevant risks and the impact that can occur if an incident actually happens and is successful. And also, we need people to be aware how the risk can be transformed and anticipate this, and also be able to detect it. So this is how we are going to start building cyber resilience. Now, when we're developing our programs, we need to consider that we have 5 pillars to consider so we can build the relevant activities. We have identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. We need to consider that at any given time, we need to be aware of the situation. Either this concerns business, technical, human, or any other aspect. And we need to create an appropriate culture that will inform all pillars. And this is why we need to center our efforts to build this mentality of cyber situational awareness and shift from the just being cyber security aware, because we need to start focusing on aspects beyond protection. Like recovering, adaptability, and so on. Now, moving on, I want to mention that when we're building our awareness and training activities, we should consider the workplace hierarchy. We have the staff relevant to day-to-day operations. Currently, we have the blended teams working either from a corporate or a home environment. And it seems that this model is going to stay even after the pandemic. So it's something that we need to take into consideration. We have the IT/OT cybersecurity teams. So we are having specialized roles here. We have the management who supervises the business operations, provides support. And finally, we have the C-level executives, which provide strategy and the corporate support. We need to consider that across the different levels, we have varying levels of risks, depending on what the responsibilities of people are. So we need to customize our training and education so it can map to the risk that each group faces, so we can create more effective content. Also, we need to consider that across the organization, we need to establish a cyber hygiene behavior so people can apply the relevant practical aspects relevant to the IT assets they are actually handling. And in this way, we will start improving the cyber resilience, minimizing the risks relevant to the assets that the company owns. Now, we also need to consider the different training levels. Overall, consider that we have 3 main levels. The general level, where we are considering training across all the personnel on fundamentals. Then we have the intermediate training, where we can consider C-level executives, management, decision makers, because we need to focus on specific risks that concern this group of people. Consider, for example, phishing that targets the high executives. We need to focus our training on specific aspects. So we need to distinguish between the training where we provide to the rest of the personnel. And finally, we need to consider that we have the in-depth training, and this is relevant to specialized roles. And here we are talking totally for technical level training. So our cyber and IT teams will be able to defend from cyber attacks. Now, in order to create effective programs, we need to consider to expand the cyber teams and bring in people that have expertise in other disciplines as well. We are expecting the cyber professionals pretty much to do everything. And in order to create more effective awareness and training activities, we need to consider other disciplines as well. We acknowledge the multidisciplinary nature of cybersecurity. It's time to bring in appropriate expertise in the teams so we can create more effective and holistic trainings and be more effective in terms of managing the risks. And the target here is to have teams that have a strong cyber skill set. And not just tick the box in terms of compliance. But when you have small teams or just a couple of people, which we expect to do pretty much everything, it's challenging to create appropriate awareness and training programs in an organization. Now, although we started, let's say, investigating the development of multidisciplinary cyber teams, we haven't investigated enough the perception of people. Here, I just want to mention a couple of interesting results we got from a study that it was performed by one of my students as part of his thesis. He conducted a study in a further education and higher education college in the UK, where he surveyed 88 students from 5 disciplines. And he observed that more students from non-computing disciplines, for example, reported that all jobs require some knowledge of cybersecurity, compared to computer students that they consider that this is a totally technical aspects where people with this background are involved. This is an issue because we want people with the traditional background, let's say, in cybersecurity, to acknowledge that they can participate in teams with other people. And at the other hand, at the end, we had the majority of non-computing students reporting that they will very unlikely to consider a job in the cybersecurity industry. Although they were interested about learning more information about cybersecurity, they consider that the skills and capabilities they developed so far through their studies, it wasn't enough to pursue a job in this area. So it's really important to promote awareness on job roles and opportunities in cybersecurity for people that originate from other disciplines and create relevant curricula where we can address these issues. Now, the cybersecurity workforce framework suggested by NIST highlights the value of building cyber teams with different roles and expertise, and indicates the process how to actually achieve this. So it's a good start if you want to consider this aspect, if you want to create teams with strong skill set and capacity. Now, moving on to the other aspect I mentioned at the beginning, in order to build cyber resilience, we also need to sustain the cyber hygiene behavior across the organization, and we can achieve this with a cyber situational awareness culture. And the target here is to build critical thinking skills into people so they can cope with the dynamic nature of the threat landscape, so they can be able to adapt when cyber attacks adapt as well. So how are we going to build such a culture? Well, first of all, we need to identify what is missing, and then we need to redesign our awareness and training strategy. So in essence, we need to revisit how people learn, and we can do so by using learning frameworks that actually model the human cognitive process. One of the well-known learning frameworks is the Bloom's taxonomy. You see here the schema, where we have 6 taxonomy levels of learning objectives. And this follows a bottom-up approach where we have higher levels of learning dependent on the previous knowledge that is acquired at the previous levels. And of course, this is the taxonomy we use across disciplines. It's a well-known taxonomy that we use in education and training. Now, let's move on to examine where the current awareness and training efforts focus at the moment. At the right side, you can see the learning objectives that can be achieved at each level. The lower levels are usually utilized to build lower order thinking skills. And then as we go upward the pyramid, we can start building a higher ordered cognitive skills and achieve critical thinking, which is the target in terms of awareness and training. Now, I mentioned typical means we use to train and make people aware, like infographics, posters, guides, tips. These usually can, let's say, make people aware about the basic concepts and help them to recall information. Seminars and phishing simulations help further so people can understand the concepts. And of course, where games or more interactive activities can be utilized, can make people, can provide the skills to people so they can actually apply best practices. Now, as you can see, the focus of the efforts goes to the lower layers of learning. Unfortunately, the expectations do not match. We expect people to demonstrate critical thinking, to be able to evaluate the situation, being able to apply a solution. But in essence, we are focusing at fundamentals, and we're not training people to actually do this. Consider, for example, in awareness, where we are talking about best practices, and we expect people to, let's say, install a password manager, so we can create stronger authentication means. But in essence, a lot of people are not familiar with this. They don't feel comfortable installing a password manager and not even using it. But we do expect people to use it. But we need to, let's say, match the expectations with the actual activities we'll deliver. So what is missing in order to cultivate critical thinking skills? We need to consider that when we are performing our activities, we need to evaluate whether people actually are aware of a cyber situation, if they can understand the concepts, they realize what is going on, so we can start motivating them to change their behavior. And once they have the fundamentals, we need to make sure that they can translate the theory to the practical concepts, and we need to make sure that they can identify the problem and they can choose a solution. If we can actually do this, then we can consider building more activities so we can build skills and knowledge, so people can analyze a situation, a new situation, and relate it to a similar case they know. And in this way, we start building adaptability. And at the end, we can increase the critical thinking and the resilience of people. So what we need to do is to focus in the middle layer of learning. in the applicability of solutions, in analyzing security incidents, so we can reinforce and motivate the change. And if we start doing this from this layer and upwards, then we can reach sustainability. Currently, we haven't reached the appropriate level of sustainability. We need people to sustain a hyper-hygiene behavior, which means that we need to keep making people aware and educating them on the risks that exist in cybersecurity and what activities they need to take. So we need to consider situational awareness as the foundation of critical thinking. This is not the approach we have been taking so far in terms of designing awareness and education activities. We need to give more emphasis on these aspects. So in terms of fundamentals, we need to make sure that people can identify the assets, the threats, the vulnerabilities, and the risks that are relevant to this, what the impact is. And we need to give great focus on making people understand the attacker's mindset and the different techniques they utilize. For example, we have seen throughout the pandemic how the phishing attacks have transformed. And people wasn't ready about that because we haven't make them aware or educate them enough. And it's something that we need to start doing so they can understand how things can escalate, how they can adapt, so they can take appropriate actions. Also, in terms of fundamentals, we need to consider the technology, what kind of practical aspects they should be aware and how they should apply and use technology. If we build this fundamental, then we need to, then we can start building the critical thinking where in a new situation, people can do what we expect, apply best practices, being able to identify indicators of compromisation and manage an incident. Managing an incident, it can be from reporting an incident to providing technical means. But we need to start thinking what needs to apply in different groups of the workforce so we can start escalating the cyber resilience across the organization. So to summarize the whole process, in order to build effective cyber resilience programs, we need to decide on the awareness and the training topics that we need to promote in the organization, depending on the services we provide, depending on the risks we face. And we certainly need to consider an interdisciplinary approach where we engage people with different backgrounds. I put here some examples: cyber education, cyber psychology, policy formation, change management, and so on. So people can consult what is the best way to create meaningful and effective messages across the workforce that will yield the necessary results. Of course, once we run the awareness and the training sessions, we need to evaluate people's understanding on the fundamentals to see if we have motivated the change and certainly implement the situational awareness across the activities we perform. We need to make certain that people at any given time, they are aware of the situation. And as I said, across different aspects. Of course, it's critical to move from the awareness and touch training aspects and help people apply practical concepts. It's really important. Otherwise, if we stay only to providing some fundamentals, we will not help people to feel comfortable with technology and be able to use what is necessary to defend. Now, if we do this, we can reinforce the knowledge so we can promote the adaptability and we can increase our chances to sustain the change, which is something that we need to keep focusing on because we haven't reached the necessary levels of sustainability. So coming to an end, I would like to summarize on some key takeaway points. We have all been discussing about how humans are considered our weakest link, and we certainly need to start viewing humans as our stronger asset, and we need to start from the awareness and training across the workforce and implement this mentality. It's important to build cyber resilience across an organization if we want to start defending against the dynamics in cyberspace. And we can do so if we can promote cyber hygiene practices across the workforce. Now, the important thing is to be able to sustain this behavior. And we can do so if we can inform our awareness and training activities with cyber situational awareness and implement this mentality across the training and any other efforts we are taking in an organization. Important to consider the expertise of different people and build multidisciplinary teams so we can manage the risk effectively and holistically. And as I said, it's time to return back to basics, revisit how people learn so we can identify what are the deficiencies, where we need to improve our efforts, and hopefully make a culture change. Now, consider that it's quite helpful to consider a learning framework across the activities that will guide us in order to focus on the learning objectives that we need to achieve and build from lower to higher level cognitive skills that will help us across the organization to build the cyber resilience. So let me thank you for attending, and I look forward for your comments and questions.
Thank you so much for this brilliant keynote. I personally learned a lot. So we have questions from the audience. So let me start with Martin. How would you contrast cyber resilience with more conventional incident response?
Actually, it has a lot of relevance because in incident response, what we are trying to do is to be resilient. So we go across the pillars I mentioned before, from identifying, protecting, detecting, recovering, and response. So what we need to do in terms of developing the awareness and training programs is to consider if something happens, how are we going to train the people to identify something and what necessary actions they need to take. It can be something very simple from reporting it to the IT teams, or it can be something even more complicated and applying a technical control. But it certainly has a great mapping between incident response and trying to achieve cyber resilience.
Perfect. So another follow-up question is it realistic to teach everyone some cybersecurity, or should we rely on students with an above average interest?
Well, interesting question. I would say that given the digital transformation that we currently seen through the pandemic, if at some point we weren't considering society as a whole, I truly believe that it's something that we need to start focusing. Even if you follow the funding schemes that we see, for example, across Europe, we see a shift to society. And we try to engage people across ages. I mean, from small young people, I mean, to elders. I personally deliver trainings from very early age participants, I mean, to seniors. So if we really need to start changing things, we need to start including everyone.
Right, fair enough. So a question from Monica. Thank you for your presentation. Which metrics, in your opinion, can be used to measure the cultural and behavioral changes in the organization that are triggered by the awareness program?
Well, there are different matrices, but I will go with a general framework where, like the NIST cybersecurity framework that has the pillars, and I will concentrate on the different aspects we need to achieve in each case. So in essence, we can measure where we are in terms of identifying an incident, protecting our assets from specific cyber attacks, detecting and then responding and recovering. So I will go with a bit more general framework in that sense, because this is what we need to do, given that so far we are lacking in different pillars, and we need to start focusing across all the pillars in order to create an effective awareness or training campaign or training sessions and so forth.
Fair enough. We have a comment and question from Tim. So, over the last few years, literature on cybersecurity pedagogy has emerged, arguing that problem-based learning and game-based learning methods are useful, often focused around controlled cyber range laboratory environments. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
What are your views on these approaches? Do you consider that the types of multidisciplinary human interactions which are needed can be adequately represented using methods like these? If not, what approaches do you consider are more effective for establishing multidisciplinary collaborations?
Okay, interesting question. Many thanks, Tim, for giving me the opportunity to answer this. I will start by saying that cyber ranges are mostly used on a technical level currently. So we are focusing on the technical teams in the majority. It's a good approach to start using the cyber ranges to train and make people aware in the more general sense, I mean, the non-technical workforce with, let's say, not that complicated activities. So in essence, they can be very useful when we have a cyber range or similar environments to build either games or other activities, smaller in context, but again, they give us a lot of flexibility of what kind of activities we can introduce, let's say, on an awareness towards a training level. This is one aspect. In terms of building multidisciplinary teams, given that we are still not up to a good level where people are aware of the opportunities, I will start with simpler, let's say, activities where we educate people of the opportunities. Again, we can introduce them into the topics, but given that part of the interdisciplinary approach, we have people, for example, from teacher education. So they don't have the technical means. It's a bit of a challenge to engage people that don't have any technical background with technical solutions, because we may face the risk of losing them. I think the approach we need to take is to inform them of what kind of role they can have, for example, in cybersecurity. And given that I mentioned teacher education, consider that they can take part in an awareness campaign design, where they bring their expertise in terms, for example, of learning frameworks, because we cannot expect everyone in cybersecurity and technical people to be aware of learning methods and cognitive science and so on. So they can bring that, that expertise, so everybody can work together and we can create more effective activities. Or people, let's say, I'm picking another non-technical discipline on purpose. Let's consider media, art and design that can create really nice, material that can be very engaging, because obviously having just, a form with a lot of information there doesn't have the same effect when you have some nice graphics, something that it will engage people. So we should not expect, a cyber professional to be aware of everything. And this is, I think, the beauty where we need to bring people together. I hope I covered Timmy's question. Otherwise, I can provide more details.
Yeah, that's great. Tim, let us know in the Q&A if that's okay. Tim also shared some references, so I'll just put them in the Q&A so that the audience can have a look. So yeah, Tim said, thank you for such a well considered and helpful answer. So we have a question from Monica. So another question, in my experience, it's more difficult to engage IT experts because they tend to think that they know already all these topics. What is your opinion, a good proposal in terms of training towards, for example, IT administrators, sorry.
Thank you, Monica, for the question. Indeed, it's a great challenge to tell the truth. But I was reading a survey lately that concerned cyber professionals, where they weren't actually using best practices in terms of security. But again, it's a challenge when people feel that we work in this area, and so we are aware of this, and perhaps we don't need training. But I believe this is something that it's a dynamic area. So updating our skills, it's something that it should be embraced by everyone, and the organizations should invest in in people's training and upskilling the workforce. Yeah.
Perfect. So Dr. Cyril is sending a comment. So great keynote, thanks. I have a question related to education. So in terms of undergraduate education, and so what do you think can we change maybe in the way we teach students just to prepare them to be more fit in a way to the change that they can do in the future?
Okay, we should start preparing them in terms of employability. And this is something that I'm actually doing with my students. So if we start going beyond the very fundamentals, we have been, perhaps being taught 10 years ago or 15 years ago, where, the education was trying to catch up with the industry. And these days, we have a lot of industry engagement with academia. So people do have, communication with industry professionals, so they are more motivated to engage in stuff beyond what they are being taught once at their university. But at the other hand, I think making more practical activities at the university level makes people more comfortable overall on on how they need to apply things. Also, I see a trend in talking more about ethics and the ethical aspect of cybersecurity, and the responsibility we have on how to handling things Another thing that we need to consider is that we need to make people aware that this area is not only about the technical issues, but also we have policy formation which is a responsibility even for technical people. So they need to have a view across all the elements that they will face in a future cybersecurity job.
Perfect. That's a brilliant answer. Thank you. So we have a question from Dr. Cyril. How do you measure the efficiency of your training sessions? What has worked and what has not worked properly?
Hi, Cyril. Thank you for the question. Well, there are different ways to measure the efficiency depending on what you employ in terms of activities. So there are occasions where we are using questionnaires before and after a training, just to see where people stand in terms of knowledge. And then when we perform the activities, just to see if they can identify changes in their knowledge. Also, when you may have more practical activities, for example, phishing simulations, where you can employ phishing simulations before a training and see if people will fall for the phish, and then you educate them. And then you can adapt the phishing to see if they can identify something that is either similar or entirely different in terms of the topic, because you want to measure if they can really understand, the adaptability, for example, in terms of the phishing attacks. Now, if we are talking about technical people, the cyber ranges, we are using them so we can measure through different activities if people can actually either, let's say, detect an attack, take an appropriate response to protect an IT asset, or if we want to see if they can embrace the mentality of an attacker, so they will know what to expect. We have relevant activities on a cyber range where we can measure if they can attack a system successfully. I think this covers the main activities we perform in terms of evaluate the efficiency of the awareness and the training activities.
Perfect. Thanks again for all the answers and for taking the time to be with us today and for the great presentation. So I'm aware of time, so I would encourage the attendees, if you have any further comments or questions, you can use the forum to post them there. But for now, I would take the time to thank again Dr. Eliana. Thanks again for being with us. And I remind you all that we have a presentation starting at 4:30. So in just over 30 minutes, we'll have a paper presentation. So I hope to see you all there. Thanks again.
Many thanks to all.